So we're driving back up to the mid-north coast in New South Wales, which is where William Tyrrell went missing. And I didn't think we'd be coming back, but we've still got questions. And the questions are about one of the people who was held up at the inquest into William's disappearance as a suspect, potential suspect. And his name's Frank Abbott. What do we know about Frank Abbott?
So Frank Abbott is a man that has been around the mid-north coast since the late 80s or 90s.
Yeah.
He's lived in both Johns River and Herons Creek.
Both of which are near Kendal, where William went missing.
And I guess there's no clear connection between him and William.
Except that he keeps talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that stands out, is Frank keeps talking about William's disappearance. There's people who give evidence at the inquest and say that Frank used to bring it up. He used to say that other people must have been involved in what happened to William. Or he would talk about an area of the bush where he said he could smell a body.
Yeah.
Or he knew what the smell of death was.
Yeah. And you have a difference between a dead kangaroo and a dead body. Yeah.
And there was evidence that he actually bragged in front of children that he killed William and disposed of William, I think, under their house.
Yeah, in a port, in a suitcase.
In a suitcase. I mean, look, it wasn't true. There's no evidence, actual direct evidence, that Frank was involved in what happened to William. But Frank keeps talking about it.
And inserting himself into the investigation. So he even contacted the police while he was in prison for child sex abuse in 2018. He contacts the police and he asks to speak to a local detective. And he tells him, I saw Tony Jones somewhere with a child. Or, he tells them things that there's no evidence of. But he's inserting himself into that investigation.
And you're right, he demands to speak to someone who's on the William Tyrrell strike force. And he knows people. So he knows Tony Jones, who's another convicted paedophile and another person of interest in the William Tyrrell investigation. And again, no evidence that Tony was involved in what happened to William, but the police are looking at him. And Frank knows Jeff Owens, a tradesman who does work on the house where William goes missing and is on the phone to the house that day. So there's this connection between Frank and the house where William goes missing. But there's no evidence that puts Frank at the house.
Yeah, and yet, as you go through all the evidence heard at the inquest, Frank just keeps popping up throughout it in these strange ways. Like, he's like...
Well, then there's Ray Porter.
Yeah.
So Ray Porter is this guy who is really elderly. He's in a care home and he's dying. And his nurse gives evidence that Ray says, before he dies, that he gave his mate a lift with a boy driving north, away from Kendal, further north in New South Wales. And the nurse says, is that the boy? Is that William Tyrrell? And apparently Ray says yes. And there's the white car. So William's foster mother says there's a white station wagon parked outside the house on the day that William goes missing. Nobody else has seen it, but she insists there was. Frank is seen driving a white station wagon in Kendal on different days. So there's all of these reasons to look at Frank and say, we should probably talk to you. As in, the police should talk to him. And he's at the inquest. He's allowed to be in the hearings. And he joins them from prison, where he's serving time for child sexual abuse. But he calls in on a video link and he's allowed to question witnesses.
Yeah. And we established earlier in the series that he in fact gets all the evidence from the inquest.
Yeah. And this, I was speaking to a former detective about exactly this just a couple of days ago and telling him about what happened. And this detective was horrified that the inquest had sent Frank, well, parts of, if not the complete brief of evidence, while Frank is preparing himself to give evidence at the inquest. So he knows what everyone is saying. He's allowed to question witnesses who are saying things about him. And everyone is waiting for Frank to be called to answer questions at the inquest. And then he doesn't. He's not questioned in person, he's not questioned in private, and then the inquest stops. And we don't know why. So there's all these questions, and we still don't have answers. So we decided it was time to drive back up to the mid-north coast and to try and find some answers to those questions.
Or find out if the police have tried to find some answers to those questions.
Yeah. I'm Dan Box, and from news.com.au, this is Witness William Tyrrell. Episode 12, The Bird Tree. And here we are. Where we are is a little town called Johns River. It's just off the Pacific Highway on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, which is where Frank moved back in the 90s, but then he stayed for years. Johns River is about a 10, maybe 12-minute drive from Kendal, where William Tyrrell was reported missing. And it's small. It's got one shop, one pub, a service station. The trees overhang a few old cars, some of them up on blocks or in pieces in the front yards of the single-storey weatherboard houses. Just a few hundred people live here. It's barely a town. I was
going to say, you said we're driving in. We almost
drove out.
Through, yeah.
It's kind of a straggler houses on either side of the road. And looks like it's in better days, hey? But people here knew Frank because he lived here, he worked here, and frankly, in a place this big, you can't get away with not knowing your neighbours. So we're going to try talking to people and find out anything we can about Frank Abbott. When I say find out anything we can about Frank Abbott, I mean it. Since the last episode of this series, Nina and I have gone deep on Frank. Looking at court files and electoral rolls.
Hello?
Following the different branches of Frank's family, where he's one of 11 brothers and sisters.
Hello? Try around the back.
We've traced phone numbers and property records to see where Frank's family lived over decades. From Western Sydney, north to Wootton, a hilltop town surrounded by cattle farms and forest, and further north to the city of Taree, which sits in a loop in the wide Manning River. And here to Johns River.
Pretty sure there's somebody at home. TV's on.
Then Herons Creek, a tiny township built around a sawmill and a rail line,
Hey, how you doing?
where the police searched after William went missing.
Sorry to bother you and turn up out of nowhere.
We followed Frank to Logan's Crossing, where he lived in a caravan belonging to a man called Jeff Owen, a tradesman who called the house where William was reported missing on that morning.
My name's Dan, this is Nina.
And north again into Queensland, where Frank's family are now scattered.
We've been trying to get in touch with a Julie Abbott.
For who?
A Julie Abbott?
No, she don't live here.
We've read the death certificates of Frank's wife, Katrina, who died in 1991 of liver failure, and of Frank's 2-year-old son, Darren, who died in 1984, and whose inquest file has been sealed, meaning it cannot be made public. We've also seen Frank's parents' marriage certificate, which showed they married at 19 and lists his dad's job as a labourer and his mum's as domestic duties. And we've read the police witness statement and the old court reports that say Frank's dad, Henry Abbott, was a child abuser. We've gone through old TV, radio and newspaper reports about Frank that show how he's been in and out of prison over decades.
Do you think Frank Abbott was involved in the disappearance?
That I cannot answer.
Including one time when he broke out of prison, stole a car and drove across the country to his sister's.
Do you think he's capable?
Well, he scares me. He still scared me in that damn stand. That's what I really want to say.
Over the decades, Frank's done time for smaller crimes, including drugs, break-and-enters, car thefts. And he's now doing time for big crimes. Specifically, child sex abuse, including 4 counts of indecently assaulting a child under 16 and 6 counts of having sex with a child under 10, against 3 victims, 2 girls and a boy, for which he's currently serving 16 years in Long Bay Prison in Sydney's East, where one of our colleagues recently saw Frank Abbott sitting and laying out the playing cards for a game of solitaire. Among everything we've learned about Frank Abbott are new details about the circumstances of William's disappearance, including that Frank told one person he'd never even been to the street where 3-year-old William was reported missing, but he told someone else he'd been among the hundreds of people who volunteered to search that area in the days that followed.
So we're at the pub now.
Yeah.
Where people have told us Frank was living in a couple of white sheds out the back of the property. I've just been speaking to the guy who owns it, and he said, look, Frank did rent some white sheds down here further on the property. He said he didn't think Frank was living in them, but he did bar Frank from the pub. He said Frank stank and he was aggressive and he just didn't want him in there.
Frank denies having anything to do with William Tyrrell's disappearance. He's claimed to other people that a bank withdrawal proves he was somewhere else that morning. And we can't speak to Frank because he's in prison, though we have written to him. And we've spoken to his sister, Elaine Harding, who didn't want to be recorded, but told us that Frank was innocent, and that he'd been willing to give evidence at the inquest into William's disappearance, which is strange because everyone expected Frank to be called to answer questions, including both William's biological and foster parents. Only Frank never did so. He wasn't called to give evidence in public and not in private. And the coroner, who's leading the inquest into William's disappearance, has ordered there be no publication of her decision why not. We asked the coroner's court to explain why Frank has not given evidence. We were told an answer might take weeks, as they are, quote, currently occupied with other work. We're still waiting.
Okay, Dan's walking up to the house. Keeps coming and just peering through the curtains at us.
In this case, getting answers isn't easy.
Right, so that guy didn't want to be recorded.
And then we haven't talked about the woman that I contacted through Facebook, right?
Since the last episode of this series, the coroners also confirmed there won't be any more evidence heard in public. Instead, the coroner wants to see written submissions from the various lawyers, which also won't be made public and aren't due for months from now, meaning it will likely be months more
before the coroner publishes her findings.
I asked her how she knew Frank.
The coroner has released a short statement saying, "It is to be understood that the New South Wales Police Force's investigation into the disappearance and suspected death of William Tyrrell may continue."
Her reply was, "Sorry it's taken so long to get back to you. I wasn't sure I was ready to talk about this. Frank sexually assaulted me as a teenager when I was living in Taree."
We asked the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions what's happening with a brief of evidence submitted by the police seeking to charge William's foster mother.
And she said, "He was never charged for it. My parents knew about it."
That brief of evidence was submitted almost 2 years ago now, and there's still been no decision as to whether to actually charge her. The DPP did not respond to our questions.
So that was a call from a guy called Patrick Teeling.
Yeah.
And we knocked on his house half an hour ago, and I left a message on his phone.
The police did charge William's foster mother and foster father with assaulting and intimidating another child who wasn't William.
He was the guy who ran the store in Johns River, which is where Frank Abbott was living.
And William's foster parents were convicted. But in the months since the last episode of this series, William's foster father has appealed his conviction for intimidation and had it overturned.
And a guy from Taree's in the store delivering bread, and he pulls Patrick aside and says, "Stay away from that guy. That's Frank Abbott."
And William's foster mother's also appealed her convictions and is waiting on a decision.
"I know him from Taree. Warn your kids. Don't let your kids go near him."
And when you put all of this together, what you've got is that so far neither the police nor the coroner seem to have any real answers about what happened to William.
And so from then on, Patrick, the storekeeper, is keeping an eye on Frank Abbott, and he doesn't like what he sees.
Which is why Nina and I have come here to the town of Johns River to ask questions, bringing us back to Frank Abbott.
He said over and again and again and again, he'd notice outside the store Frank Abbott talking to women or women and children and just getting too close. He said he used to, at night sometimes he'd be awake and he'd see Frank backing out of his property with his lights off, getting down the road, and then the lights would turn on, and he said Frank was out and he was stealing stuff. And the local people would say in Johns River, "If you're missing something, go and look at Frank's house." He says, I'm just reading my notes, I made shorthand notes of the conversation. He says he's just one of those guys, he didn't have any scruples. And he said he was worried about him. And then Patrick said of Frank, "You wouldn't feed him." He said jail's too good for him.
Wow.
So why did his old neighbours say jail's too good for Frank Abbott? What had he done?
Just hit record.
This okay?
Yeah.
Right, so we're recording.
This man used to live next door to Frank. He doesn't want to be named. We're sitting on the front porch of his home in Johns River, the main road behind us, and the bodies of old cars seemingly scattered, almost half forgotten in the surrounding forest.
Tell me about Frank.
Well, when I first met him, we sort of got on for a while.
Yeah.
And then I heard stories about some girl in Sydney.
And did you hear those stories from him or from other people?
No, other people. It was in the paper too, I think.
Yeah.
He sort of kept to himself. But my ex-missus used to get out and do the garden. He used to look over the fence and stuff.
When she was out in the garden?
Yeah, when it was hot, she was in a bikini out the back. Like, we had a fence, but he used to look over.
So you could see him like peering over the
Yeah,
fence.
I caught him.
What did you do?
Oh, I was going to flog him, but I didn't. Because he come out with a machete. Like,
You what?
a machete.
So you got into a blue with him.
I didn't fight him, no.
But you were
Just that. Oh,
you had words,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
he went back in and came out with a machete.
Yeah.
And this is your next door neighbour.
Mm.
How did you get on after that?
Not really.
Before he pulled a machete on you, did you ever talk to him about anything at all? Did you get on with him much? Or?
Yeah, I used to talk to him. He was all right. But...
Tell me about what he was like.
Oh, he was just, he was pretty dirty.
In what way?
Wasn't that clean.
Yeah.
And the house was pretty feral.
Yeah.
Had chooks living in it. And
yeah,
just
chickens
rubbish.
living in his house.
Yeah, we used to go to the tips and at night and break into the tip.
So he used to go and steal stuff at night and break into the tip.
Come back and tip, cut a hole in the fence.
And bring it back here?
Yeah. But none of my kids were allowed over there.
Why not?
Well, just the way he was. Just the stories.
What stories?
Well, that he was a pedophile.
Has the police ever spoken to you?
Yeah.
About
detectives.
About Frank?
Yeah. On the phone.
What were they saying?
They just asked me about him. Same thing I'm telling you.
Same thing, yeah. And then they never came back after that?
No.
Yeah. Okay. The police who spoke to Frank's old neighbour were detectives from the strike force investigating the disappearance of William Tyrrell. But they only called him. He says they never visited in person. Sitting on his front porch, I looked next door at Frank Abbott's old house. Someone new lives there now since Frank moved out, and there are more cars on the front lawn, a little boat, a tinny up on a trailer, and what looks like a black stone gargoyle of some kind of winged mythical creature beside the screen door. Hi, mate. I look over at all of that and I think, all right, it's worth a visit. Let's have another knock, because we had chatted to him before. The screen door's shut, but the main door behind it is open, and I can see it's dark inside the house, although it's late morning, almost midday. I'm pretty sure we wake the owner up. My name's Dan. I'm sorry to bother you on a Sunday morning. The man comes to the doorway, scratching himself and shirtless, wearing only shorts, and he's big. Muscular, he's got tattoos across his body, but he's friendly. How long did you know him for?
Not long, as we bought this place.
Yeah. The man invites us in.
They come sit around.
How long have you been here for? He says he's lived here since 2010. 4 years before William was reported missing.
He used to rent this place from
We sit down in a lounge room dominated by a long black sofa and a big noisy fish tank. The man starts talking about how they took over the house from Frank Abbott.
I think we've done about 13 loads
13 loads?
of rubbish from the backyard.
What kind of rubbish?
I mean, everything, mate. There's washing machines over in this corner.
Yeah.
There's like, I don't know, steel bathtubs over in that corner.
Scrap metal and bits. Things you could sell, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know about selling them, but yeah. And that's what I mean, even now, like you go out there, you could dig the dirt.
Yeah.
And you'll still find shit in the dirt like that. It was that thick.
What was it like inside the house?
Very dark and gloomy. Like the bathroom was basically rotted out, sort of thing.
It was rotten in the bathroom.
Yeah, like all the walls inside the floor and that. It was very like old, and it was one of these houses where you could, it was 50-50. You could push it down and start building again, or you could start renovating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we chose to renovate it.
And was it clean?
It was very old and dusty inside, and then stuff that was inside, it was like, you can say antique furniture, but he got it from out the front of someone's house or whatever, like it wasn't proper, you know what I mean?
So it was old furniture?
Yeah.
Not so much antique as old, and had been thrown away?
Yeah.
Tell me about Frank himself. What was he like?
I talked to him and that, like straight up. I just assumed he's another old bloke, a bit funny in his ways. But then, once you've heard the stories and stuff, like from people around town, and even from his brother named Bluey, that was his nickname, Bluey. Like, even he had nothing nice to say about him.
What stories did you hear about Frank?
Well, I heard about, I don't know like who it was at the time, but it was young girls and young boys. Something about he took them out to the forest out here, this one here, and but tied them up to trees.
What?
Yeah, tied them up to trees and I'm not going to sit here and make up something that I don't know. I'm just saying tied them up to trees and did something bad out there.
Did you hear anything else?
Yeah, well, Frank was basically like creeped around any girl. He'd be onto him.
One story this man tells us we hear more than once in Johns River from other people who knew Frank. But I'm not going to repeat it. Not because we don't think that story's true, but because we fear it might be. And I don't want to identify the people involved.
I was saying, I didn't really have any hate or anything towards him, because as I said, they're all stories, you know, and he's always wandering around town and making out he was going to get a lift to help out someone, or like cleaning or something for people. But anyway, that's as much as I knew him. Like, yeah, how you doing? Like, and then he stopped in here once or twice, like even a couple of times more. And my dad's given him a lift. Like, he was always hunting for a lift to the shops or something. So that's as much as we knew of him. Like, you know what I mean? Just you give him a lift, be nice, you know, don't fuck him.
Be nice. Don't fuck with Frank Abbott and give him a lift if you see him. Soon after this mention of his dad giving Frank Abbott a lift, the man's father walks into the lounge room behind us.
Here's my dad. He'll might have a thing to say.
Anyway, how you doing?
I walk over and introduce myself.
My name's Dan. We're journalists. This is a colleague of mine, Nina.
They're doing a story, a news thing on Frank Abbott.
Oh, Frankie boy.
Yeah, so you can sit down and have a chat in a minute.
Yeah.
Whatever, and I'll go have a cigarette. And because my dad knew him just as much as I did.
So we swap over. The first man goes outside to the front yard of the house to smoke a cigarette, and we're left there, sitting in the lounge room on the big black sofa, talking to his father. You knew Frank Abbott for how long?
Since we moved up here, 2010.
How would you describe him?
Dirty. I drove him down to Old Bar once, and Frank would always bum a ride, put it on you to offer him a lift.
He says he gave Frank a lift to Old Bar, which is another little town about a half-hour drive south along the highway, where the Manning River flows out between two long, empty beaches to the ocean.
He had a job there to do with cutting a woman's lawn. I dropped him at the house and I said, Frank, how long? Because I wanted to have a look around Old Bar as well myself. And he said, a couple of hours. I said, well, if you're going to be that long, I'll pick you up. So I come back and picked him up, and I was astounded what he said to me. He said, this woman's got heaps of money in the house. And he didn't actually say it in words, but he wanted me to come in with him to rob her. And I thought, what a low person he is. Like, everything about him was shifty.
There's no proof Frank was thinking of robbing that woman. But so far in Johns River, I've heard so many different stories about Frank. that this one doesn't surprise me.
Um,
Did you ever hear Frank say anything that he might have done worse than stealing? This time, the answer does surprise me.
yeah, it's his brother Bluey, he's a nice bloke.
Frank's brother, Jeffrey, whose nickname was Bluey because he had orange hair. Apparently it's an Australian thing, go figure. Anyway, Bluey...
He died
in 2020.
Quite a few years back now. But he always said when the stories are going around with Tyrrell that he didn't do it, and right pretty close to when he died, Louis said to my son, he said, he did do it. He said, and he's buried up on Big Bird Mountain there, where that big tree is. Big Bird, they got a sign on there. And yeah, no, I thought that was a turn around from Bluey saying that, because he wanted to like his brother. But he didn't. You could see it in that he didn't like him.
Wait, stop. As the older man is saying this, I'm trying to process what we're hearing. So the story goes, Bluey was Frank's brother, and apparently Bluey used to say Frank was not involved in William Tyrrell's disappearance, except right up just before he died, Bluey said to this man's son, Frank was involved.
He did do it.
And William's buried up on Big Bird Mountain?
He's buried up on Big Bird Mountain there.
Where there's some kind of big tree?
Where that big tree is. Big Bird, they got a sign on there.
Later, we'll discover there's this big tree outside of Johns River called the bird tree, which is this giant blackbutt tree. It's about 70 or so metres high and 11 metres around the trunk. And everyone who lives on the mid-north coast apparently knows this tree. Other members of Frank Abbott's family will tell us they used to visit it as children. The bird tree stands on the slopes of Middle Brother, which is a mountain.
Up on Big Bird Mountain there.
But where my brain starts to do loops is when we learn that the bird tree is next to another giant blackbutt called Benaroon, which is the same name as the road where William Tyrrell was reported missing, Benaroon Drive. And when I Google the bird tree, a state government website says you get there via Battar Creek Road, which is the road leading to Benaroon Drive. Most of that area is forest, a national park named after the Middle Brother Mountain. And we learned that the morning after William is reported missing, at 9:22 a.m, Frank Abbott's mobile phone pings off the Middle Brother cell tower, which is described in evidence before the inquest as covering the Kendall area. So the area around the town where William was reported missing. But that Kendall area, it's a huge chunk of land. Looking at a map, it must be dozens of square kilometres of mostly empty forest, farmland and dirt roads. So this mobile phone ping doesn't actually prove anything, except that Frank is likely somewhere in that area. But right now, in this conversation with the old man, inside what used to be Frank Abbott's house in the town of Johns River, I'm thinking, why bring this up? We haven't even asked you about William. I'm also thinking none of this is evidence.
In court, a judge would dismiss it and call it hearsay. It's just a story told by one person who says they heard it from another. It proves nothing, and I'm not suggesting it's true, far from it. But sitting here, listening to this man say what his son said that Bluey told him.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a turn around from Bluey.
I'm thinking we really need to talk to your son. We might just go and ask your son about what you've just told us about Bluey.
Yeah.
The old man seems relaxed and jokes that we should remind his son to mow the lawn while we're out there.
Tell him he's got to do the grass.
I will. I'll make sure.
We will get him back to work soon,
I think he's just waiting for it to get too hot again.
So we bundle up our recording kit and head out of the house when he says something.
He probably forgot about that, but I didn't forget about it.
Only I'm distracted and miss it. And later, listening back, it's hard to hear because the microphone's bumping as we hurry out the front to where his son is smoking.
He probably forgot about that, but I didn't forget about it.
He probably forgot about that, but I didn't forget about it.
The way he changed his version with his brother.
The way he changed his version with his brother, meaning Frank and his brother Bluey.
No one ever checked that out. He must have told quite a few people that story.
No one ever checked that out. And he must have told quite a few people that story. But Bluey's dead, so he can't tell us if he really said that. Later, we ask Frank about this in writing, in a letter we send to him in prison, but we haven't heard back.
Because he died right after that.
Do you remember when he died?
Bluey?
Yeah.
Oh, it's got to be 8 years then.
So the best thing we can do right now is go outside to the front of the house where the old man's son is smoking next to the front porch and an unused lawnmower. Hey mate, your dad's got a message for you. He says, can you mow the lawn?
Yeah, got to finish mowing the lawn.
Hey, there was one thing he said though which I wanted to ask you about, and maybe it just slipped your mind. He said about Bluey. At this point, the wind outside the house starts blowing.
Sorry, just move slightly this way.
Oh yeah, sure thing.
Just in the wind a bit, yeah.
I can see Nina frowning. The wind makes it hard to record what someone's saying. Do you want to go inside?
Yeah, can we just step? Sorry. Just a little bit windy on this.
We go inside the house and crowd together in the kitchen. There's a TV playing in the background. Your dad was talking about Frank's brother Bluey.
Yeah.
And he was also saying that, you remember that little lad William Tyrrell went missing up in Kendal? He said afterwards, Bluey would always say Frank didn't do it, because it was in the news that Frank had been looked at by the inquest.
Yeah.
Was that right, from memory?
I remember him saying that he didn't believe Frank had anything to do with it, but then at the same time, he'd sit there and tell you, so I haven't got anything nice to say about him. But
And then your dad said that before Bluey died, he came to you and he may have said something different?
No, I can't remember that. I don't. Yeah.
Bluey didn't say anything about maybe Frank could have done it.
Not that I remember.
Or that William may have been buried up on, is it Big Bird Hill?
No. Bluey was always he was the only one that basically of his family that he didn't really have contact, but he used to hear the stuff that was going on because he was the first part of the family, and there was another brother who lived in Queensland. So Bluey used to hear the stories of what's going on with Frank through his brother in Queensland.
Yeah.
And so Just from them stories that Blue used to hear, like he'd sometimes pass on to us, like because Blue would be transferring like not messages, but just talk that's happening through what's happening at court. Yeah, he's getting charged with this and stuff like that. But I know he did say something like he didn't believe that Frank was guilty, but he also said that I think it's under the belief that Frank needed the jail time, like because what he's done in his past just sort of makes up for it. Right. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, so he deserved to be in jail because of things he'd done in his past.
Yeah. So it's been a while, so I can't really.
That's all right. Thanks for clearing that up for us, though.
Yeah, no, all good.
We'll get out your hair.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, mate.
Have a good one. Good luck with the lawn.
Yeah, good luck with the lawn.
Nina and I walk out of Frank's old house into the sun, thinking about this story of the bird tree. I'm convinced it's just that, a story. And even if Bluey really said that, which I doubt, then who's to say it wasn't Bluey himself who was involved and trying to shift attention to Frank, his brother? We get in our car and drive off. Outside Johns River on the highway, we pass a turning with a road sign pointing to the bird tree, and we ignore it. We just keep on driving. Then, weeks later, Nina and I are back in Johns River, still working on this podcast, and we pull up again outside Frank's old house. The older man is sitting outside on the front deck.
Just going to record. Yeah.
I walk up and he says, hello. The conversation goes straight back to Frank Abbott and his brother, Bluey.
He's changed his mind about it.
Who's that?
His brother, Bluey, yeah.
The old man waves me over to a metal gate beside the house.
Buddy! Bluey's dog.
That's Bluey's dog?
Yeah.
Behind it is a big, old dog that reminds me of a bloodhound. And the old man says that was Bluey's dog.
How did you end up with Bluey's dog?
We've got 6 dogs.
You got 6 dogs?
Yeah. Love dogs, love animals.
So did you get Bluey's dog after Bluey died, or?
No, before he died, he had to go to the Tyrrell to be close to the hospital.
Right.
Walking back to the front veranda, the old man sits at the table and I pull up a toolbox to sit on with him.
I'll sit on this.
I realise his memory isn't perfect. He sometimes loses track of what he's saying.
I lost my train of thought.
He trails off.
Yeah, I don't know what was I just saying then?
You said you went down to the bowling.
But on one thing, he's insistent.
Frank did do it. That's the words I heard from my son, what Bluey told him. Frank did do it, and he's buried up there on Big Bird somewhere.
When you say Big Bird, do you mean the bird tree?
Yeah, that mountain just there. If you go up the top of the mountain and you look down on top of it, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's the words, and I couldn't get over that because they still haven't found them.
When your son came and told you about Bluey saying that about Frank, did you think, we should do something with that, we should tell someone?
He doesn't really answer.
It sounded like Bluey just gave up defending him or something like that. And that's what I heard.
We asked your son about if Bluey said that to him, and he said he couldn't remember.
He would have said it. Was, I remember, like, tight-lipped or shut your mouth.
I remember tight-lipped or shut your mouth, he tells us. Then the old man's son arrives, driving onto the front lawn. He gets out, angry, shirtless again, and walks across the grass towards us, shouting, saying he doesn't want to talk about Frank Abbott, and waving at us to get away and get out. So we get out. We've been in Johns River long enough, we reckon. And this time, driving away, again, we pass the sign for the bird tree and keep driving. It's probably nothing. We'll tell the police. But I'm thinking about something the younger man, the son, told us when we spoke to him the first time and asked him about whether Frank Abbott's brother Bluey told him something about William Tyrrell. And his reply was, I don't remember.
I know he did say something like he didn't believe that Frank was guilty.
Bluey didn't believe that Frank was guilty of anything to do with William.
But he also said that I think it's under the belief that Frank needed the jail time, like because what he's done in his past that sort of makes up for it.
But Bluey was under the belief Frank needed jail time to make up for what Frank had done in his past. Which makes me ask the question, what did Frank do? And that's when Nina and I start looking at the young woman who disappeared and where Frank was found not guilty.
She was riding a push bike, I think it was, and and he picked her up and threw them. I think he said he had a ute.
And what did he say he did with the push bike?
I think he did dump it.
So he picked her up with her bike, maybe put the bike in the back of the ute?
Apparently.
And then did he tell you what happened next? That's next time on Witness William Tyrrell. A lot of different people have been involved in making this series. Among them, the executive producer is Nina Young. The sound design was by Tiffany Dimmack. The producers have been Emily Pidgeon, Nicholas Adams Jasbar, Phoebe Zakowski-Wallace and Tabby Wilson. Research by Aidan Patrick. Original music by Rory O'Connor. Our lawyer is Stephen Coombs. The editor at news.com.au is Kerry Warren. I'm Dan Box.